Hello and welcome back. This is our annual look at Defensemen, and today we'll go over a recap of last season comparing ADP to N rank. We'll look at the elite power play quarterback defenseman, the power play timeshare options, the top hits and blocks D, and our overall strategy concerning D this upcoming draft season. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right in. Now, the data draft strategy from day one has always emphasized drafting two elite power play quarterback defensemen. And if you want more insight into the background of what makes this strategy work, I've done quite a bit of analysis, and you can find most of it in these videos, which are all on this channel, and I'll link them in the description below. Now, the main emphasis of drafting those two elite quarterback defensemen is to boost your offensive categories and the correlation between a good, high productive offense and winning championships. So that analysis has been done in these videos. You can go find those in the description below. But as we did in the goaltending video, we went over the disappointing draft picks based on ADP and N rank. So let's do that same analysis with defensemen for last season. Now, we're not going to spend too much time here because there is nuance to this, and this is very general. But the first thing to take note of is where the disappointment is not. So first off, we have no defenseman drafted in the first round. We have Cale Makar, who was the only defenseman drafted in the second round, and he was not disappointing. And then you've got some disappointment pretty much throughout the draft, except for in these even-numbered rounds. For some reason, 2, 4, 6, and 8 are all relatively decent places to pick your D, and we will go into a little bit more detail in the next slide. Now, with all that said, this is hinting to us that if you need to draft those D, you got to do it earlier. And if you want to provide, if you want to get relative value based on their draft position, that's where you have to do it, because everyone past the 9th round range is pretty much disappointing. There's a lot more defensemen drafted in this range as players, fantasy players start to forget about them and they start to draft them in this range after they've gotten their, elite offensive guys and their goaltenders. And a lot of these guys did not hold up their end of the bargain. So now as we dig into the specifics, this is a little interesting. So the first thing that we'll take note of on the right here, this is, again, if you are new to this and if you weren't here for the goaltending video, if they were drafted and they dropped at least 15 spots between their ADP and their N rank, they were labeled as disappointing. If they were within that 15 spot range, they were similar. And if they improved based on their ADP, they were obviously labeled improved. So with that said, there's not much upside in this range. So this is basically 13th round and on. There's a lot of disappointment. These are guys that I guess you're swinging on upside and hoping to, find a Sean Dursey, or Neil Pionk was pretty good. You have Matheson, who's always a really good value pick. Ekholm was pretty good. There's a couple of guys scattered in here, but for the most part, these guys were very disappointing. The other thing that I noticed is that the only non-disappointing D after the 10th round were power play quarterback guys who were sharing some of that time. So most of those guys I just mentioned, plus Gostisbehere, Chychrun. You also had up here, Sanderson was splitting some power play time with Shabbat. Hannafin was splitting some power play time in a couple, both in Calgary and in Vegas. So the main guys that were similar or improved in this range had some power play exposure. The rest of them did not. The other thing that I noticed is that you do have to reach a little bit on hits and blocks D. So if you look over on the left side now, some of these guys, you look at Darnell Nurse being drafted at 106. That's a little high considering he's not a power play guy, but he is a really good hits and blocks guy. Dobson was good for blocks. He's here. Letang is a good peripherals guy. He's in this range, relatively improved. Doughty usually does a little bit of peripheral work for you. He's relatively improved. You also have a couple of the other usual suspects. John Carlson, really good for blocks. You have Mo Sider. So a lot of these guys in this range that were improved or similar are hits and blocks D, the guys that you're going to want for your peripherals, and guys had to reach on these guys to pick them up in their drafts. Trouba is another guy who I wouldn't necessarily claim as disappointing. He's just disappointing offensively. He was holding up his end of the bargain if you're looking for hits and blocks, and he was probably targeted for that in terms of ADP. But if you need those hits and blocks D, you may have to reach on those guys like Trouba, Gudis, Shen, etc. We'll get into that towards the end of this video. But those elite power play quarterbacks are super rare, the top left, and having two of them will boost your offense. And obviously we know offense wins championships. So it is important to grab those two elite D. As I mentioned, after the 10th round, there's almost no point to picking D except to fill out those peripherals or to take upside on a potential timeshare power play quarterback. But you do You do want to get those 2 elite guys in this range before the 9th round, and we kind of saw that on the bar graph, but you're seeing it here again. A lot of these guys improved even though they were drafted relatively high. So Quinn Hughes, Yossi, Dahlin, Makar, you've got Hedman, you've got Bouchard, Seider, Carlson. A lot of these guys we will look at in detail in the next couple of slides, but this tells us that you need to draft those D between around the 3rd and the 9th round. You're never going to have, if you're going to pick Makar, you're probably going to be happy with that pick. And then right around here, this is around the 3rd round range. And then you're looking from there all the way down to around the 9th round for where these guys are not going to overwhelmingly disappoint you. Now, with all of this said, 52.3% of the D chosen in the first 9 rounds were disappointing, but if you compare that with the 9th round plus, 75% were. So that's a huge gap, and that shows you that you need to find that value in those first 9 rounds. If you don't, you're really playing with fire there, and you're hoping on upside. But a lot of these guys on this side of the graph, or on this side of the Excel spreadsheet, were available on the waiver wire. You could have found a lot of these guys, especially down here off the waiver wire. So why draft them at that point? So if you don't want to be disappointed, you do need to draft those 2 elite power play quarterback D in the first 9 rounds. But who are those guys, and who aren't in some sort of a timeshare? Because a lot of teams are going to have a couple of different options. So this is a look at last year's power play time on ice on the left. This is courtesy of StatMuse. And then we also have kind of my, take on the undisputed guys, the guys who are not being pushed by anybody else on their D-line that could potentially take some time away from them. And it's the usual suspects. You've got Quinn Hughes, Roman Yossi, Cale Makar, Adam Fox, Victor Hedman, Evan Bouchard, Josh Morrissey, Rasmus Dahlin, Charlie McAvoy, Noah Dobson. Now, those are the undisputed guys. There's nobody else really on these teams that are pushing for the power play 1 spot, and a lot of these are some of the best power plays in the league, and these are pretty obvious people that you should draft for power play exposure. Down here are the likely power play 1 quarterbacks. Now, there may be some guys who are pushing for some time on the power play, and I'll get into each of those. So Miro Heiskanen, he should be the power play 1 guy, but it is worth noting that Thomas Harley had an incredible season last year. If you look at the time on ice split per game last year, Heiskanen 318, Harley 114. So he did get a little bit of power play time. I definitely still think it's Miro's power play spot to lose. But with that said, there is somebody else there that could push for some time. In terms of Justin Falk, it used to be Krug and Falk splitting time, but last year Scott Perunovich got some time. So Perunovich had 212 per game on time on ice for the power play. Justin Falk at 149, so a little bit lower. However, right now Daily Faceoff is listing Falk as the power play 1 quarterback. He's the veteran. I would assume they're going to start with him. Perunovich could be a nice, throwing a dart at the dartboard late in the draft kind of pick, or he could be a good waiver wire pickup. But right now, I do think that Falk has the inside track to get that spot. In terms of Chicago, Seth Jones should be the guy. And he should be a really good value pick at 149.3. He puts up a ton of blocks. His shot volume has come up recently, and that power play should be improved this year. However, Kevin Korchinski played a minute 47 on the power play last year on average, and they do have Levshinov. I don't know if he makes the team. He's out for a couple weeks right now, so that's maybe something to monitor later in the season, as they're probably going to be out of it, and they maybe call up Levshinov late in the year. But up until that point, Seth Jones should be a really reliable power play quarterback. You've got Zach Werenski at 116. He's usually a good shot volume guy and a goal scorer, but there is Ivan Provorov. He had a minute 31 on the power play last year, so I do expect it to be Werenski, but there is another option. There used to be 2 options, but they got rid of Boquist, so it should be one of those 2 guys. I would definitely assume it's Werenski. And then Drew Doughty. This is an interesting conversation because he's kind of had a resurgence in the last year or two where he's become a little bit more fantasy relevant. He's going at 109. He spent $315 per game on the power play, but you had Jordan Spence at 134 per game, and you also have Brant Clark there. So all 3 of those guys are right shot D. They're all relatively offensive, especially Brant Clark and Jordan Spence, both having flashes last season showing what they can do. So there technically are guys coming up that they might want to give some power play time to, but Doughty, again, is the veteran. He should have that inside track, and he did have the most time on ice out of all of those guys on the power play last year. And finally, Morgan Riley. Again, he should be the number 1 power play quarterback, but there's a reason they brought in OEL. There's a reason that they had John Klingberg previously, because they never really thought of Morgan Riley as that offensive. Now, Riley has taken steps in the right direction over the past couple of years to become better and better offensive fantasy defenseman. He's always been relatively good. He's always kind of gone in this ADP range, but he's taken a couple steps in the last couple of years. But it is worth noting that they do bring in OEL as a free agent, and they might give him some time. OEL saw almost 2 minutes of power play time on ice, but that was with Florida last year. So these are some options for you. If you're definitely going to want one of these guys in this top list. If it were me, I would want one of these guys as my power play quarterback number 2. So my D1 would come from this list. My D2 would come from this list. And then if you're looking at D3, it really kind of depends on your league format. But let's take a look at some of the timeshare options, because these are guys that you might want to look at for that D3 option. If you're in a points league where you're getting power play point weighting, power play assists or goals, anything like that, you're going to want one of the offensive guys who gets some power play exposure, and these are those guys. If you're in a categories league and you're in a heavy bangers, hits and blocks league, we'll go over those options coming up next. But these guys, there is some level of ambiguity as to who's going to get the power play. So in Anaheim, you got Fowler, Mintyukov, and Zellweger, all potentially options for that first power play unit. In Calgary, we're hoping it's Mackenzie Weegar because he's incredibly complete, very good for hits and blocks. You can see over here is a 64 in terms of his 3-year combined rating. That's completeness plus weighted rating averaged out. So this is a really good number for him. He's always very complete because of those hits and blocks numbers. And if he gets that power play 1 spot, he will be incredible value at ADP 90. But if he doesn't, then that's going to limit his ceiling in terms of offensive production. Now, he did have an incredible goal scoring year last year. I would expect some regression there. He had 20 goals last year. I would expect it to be around 10 to 15 this year. But if he gets that power play time, that's a case where he could potentially repeat that goal total. In Carolina, again, this could have been in the other category where it's like it should be Gostisbehere. He should be that guy. But at the same time, they've been going to Brent Burns for the power play the last couple of years. They did try Tony DeAngelo there, but Burns had 238 time on ice on the power play, but Gostisbehere in Detroit, 321, and they brought him in for a reason. You're going to think that they're going to give him that power play spot and see what he can do with it. So this should be Gostisbehere. You should be able to get some value out of Gostisbehere considering he's going at 155.2. He's just not that complete. So if he doesn't get that full PP1 exposure, that could prevent him from providing good value for you at 155, but he shouldn't hurt you at that point. You should still get some value out of that ADP. Now, speaking of Detroit, Seider, we would like it if he got that time because he is, like Weegar, very complete with hits and blocks. But they bring in Eric Gustafsson, who was able to quarterback that Rangers power play in the absence of Adam Fox. He only got a minute 18 last year, but that's because Fox was healthy. When Fox was out, he was getting all of that power play one time, and he can quarterback a power play. That's why they bring him in, kind of as a replacement to Gostisbehere. It'll be interesting to see who they use there. I would hope that they are going to go with Seider because that gives him good value, and he's going at ADP 76. So you would like him to be a power play quarterback if you're paying a premium to get him. But if not, you're going to get good value on Gustafsson, who is not ranked right now. So he's completely unranked. You can maybe find him off the waiver wire after your draft. If they're going to go with him, that could be a nice little pickup after your draft. And then back to Florida. This is a team that has had a lot of turnover. It could be Ekblad. It could be Forsling. He didn't see a lot of power play time last year, and they did bring in Adam Boquist. So this will be very interesting to monitor in preseason to see who they use. Same type of thing in Minnesota. Now, it should be Brock Faber, considering what he did towards the end of last year. He had an incredible rookie season, but they were using Jared Spurgeon a little bit more. Spurgeon has been in and out of the lineup the last couple seasons, so it should be Faber. He's the guy that they're going to lean on for the future. So Faber should still be a good draft pick at 108, but that sophomore slump is something to think about as you're picking. But this is right at the tail end of the 8th or 9th round, so this is pretty much the cutoff of where you can find those guys, and you're probably not going to get disappointed. A little bit further down, this is an interesting conversation to have. Mike Matheson is always a really, really good option because nobody ever seems to pay attention to where he's being drafted, and then he comes out and has an incredible season. And he does this reliably year over year, has good blocks numbers, good shot numbers. Offensive numbers are usually there because he's the power play one quarterback. But they did have Lane Hudson get a couple of games last season. I would imagine they're going to give him a little bit of runway on the power play and see what he can do with it. Matheson should be a guy that you could still find pretty deep in the draft, but with that said, they will probably give Hudson a little bit of a taste there, and he could be an interesting draft pick depending on where he's going. Right now, Hudson is going at 173 ADP, so that should be value. The only thing is he doesn't have a lot of a track record. He doesn't have a lot of data on him, so I don't know what else he's going to be able to bring. Is he going to block shots? Is he going to hit? Is he going to be productive 5-on-5? We don't know, but that should be pretty decent value considering it's towards the end of your draft and you're kind of just swinging on upside there. Now, the conversation in New Jersey is very interesting. Luke Hughes is out for 6 weeks at least. Dougie Hamilton was out all of last year, and therefore Luke Hughes had 327 time on ice on the power play, and that power play was pretty good. They have never really had that elite upper echelon power play, but they were, very productive with Luke Hughes back there. 25 power play points for him. Dougie Hamilton has always been a power play quarterback. He's been a high shot volume guy, a really good goal scorer. He does hit a little bit and block shots, so he should be the more complete option. He's one of our more complete options. In fact, the most complete on this list at almost a 70 in terms of his 3-year average combined rating. Going at ADP 63, that could be value if he takes over that role and runs with it for the rest of the season. But if Luke Hughes comes back and retakes that power play spot, he could be value at ADP 111. So this is an interesting case to see. There's a little bit of risk involved with each. I don't know if I would take both guys on your same team just because you're kind of limiting yourself with other options and guys who may have that spot locked down. But with that said, this will be interesting to monitor as Luke Hughes comes back from that injury. But Dougie Hamilton should be a really good pickup at ADP 63. He's always been a heavy shot volume and goal scoring guy. And with that and the unimpeded power play time in the first couple weeks of the season, that should give him a good runway to start with. And what you could do with Dougie is you could start him for the first couple weeks and trade him off before Luke Hughes comes back. If you're going to go that route, you probably want a little bit of insurance, but still, that could be the way to go. Now we've got Sanderson and Shabbat in Ottawa. I don't know what they're going to do with this. Sanderson is the up-and-coming guy. Shabbat's the more experienced guy. Shabbat a little bit higher ranked at a 58, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah, he's a 51 up here for Sanderson. And Shabbat is going at a lower ADP, so you might get better value on Shabbat, but it has, Sanderson did take over a little bit more of that power play duty last year, so that is worth noting as well. Both of these guys should be good value, but again, you're in that range where a lot of these guys were disappointing last year. Then for Philly, there's really no apparent option. Drysdale, York, Sanheim, they've tried Zamula back there. They've tried everybody, and they haven't found a guy that fits really well with that top power play unit. Torts is not a very offensive coach, so I don't know how much he's coaching the power play or who is coaching the power play. They need to figure that out. So all three of these guys would be, swings for the fences, kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard. All of them should be relatively low ADP. Sanheim broke out, was really good last year in the first month or two, and then kind of faded off of that. So not a lot of confidence in these three guys, but there's a number of options that you could go to late in drafts if you're trying to find value. But speaking of value, Erik Karlsson should be the guy. Now, this could be another case where he should be the PP1 guy no matter what, but Chris Letang has done that in the past, and Letang has a really high peripheral floor. So Erik Karlsson going around 99, that's really excellent value if you're getting a power play one quarterback who's getting you Crosby exposure. So that should be his main selling point. But then you also have Letang, who's got really high peripheral floor, always a good hits and blocks guy, and he got almost 2 minutes of power play time last year. So whether they're using 2 units or whether they're using both of these guys on the top unit, it is worth mentioning that there is somebody else that they can go to other than Karlsson, but it should be him because they're paying him $11 million to quarterback that power play. In San Jose, Muka Medulin led the time on ice of the guys who were still left. Henry Thrun had a little bit of runway there at the beginning of last season, looked pretty good, but then got sent down. And then they did bring in Jake Wallman, who got a little bit of power play time, but there's not a clear-cut front runner. Kalen Addison was their time on ice leader last year. He's moved out. So it's, pretty much going to come down to training camp and whoever takes that spot and runs with it. And you wouldn't really want exposure to this power play anyways. However, if you're looking for that theme of a good power play quarterback on a bad team and a guy that you can get off the waiver wire, one of these guys is going to be on the waiver wire, no question. So you could probably find that late. And that's why this year we're going to advocate for not necessarily focusing on a D4, because you could find guys like this off the waiver wire that could fill that role. Now in Seattle, Vince Dunn has been a really good power play quarterback the last couple of years, but they bring in Brandon Montour for a reason. Almost 4 minutes of power play ice time per game. It's interesting because he's coming to a new team. We'll see how the usage is between the two of them, but he's been brought in for a reason. They need more scoring, and they didn't add any forwards up front, that are difference makers, I should say. But Brandon Montour is the difference maker on the back end. So he's a guy that's hopefully going to, improve their power play, boost their goal scoring. They were a very good defensive team last year. If they can get a couple more goals, they should be a playoff team. And Montour should be relied on for the power play duties. However, we do also have Vince Dunn there. That's why he's on this list. Same type of thing with Durzi and Sergachev. Durzi was the guy last year, 316 time on ice. Sergachev comes over, and his value skyrocketed in Tampa when he was the power play quarterback. And I remember going into last season's draft, it was people were fading Hedman because they assumed that Sergachev was going to get that role. I was advocating for picking up Hedman because it was a low risk, high reward, and it turned out to work out pretty well for him. But Sergachev is very complete. So if he does get this power play spot, you can see him up here. He's going at 79.6, relatively complete, but he did miss a lot of time last year with that gruesome knee injury, or not a knee injury, but a broken leg of some sort. So this is an interesting spot to pick him up because you're paying a premium on him. And if he doesn't end up as the power play quarterback, that will probably not be giving you good value based on what you're looking for in this range. You want that power play quarterback, and between Montour and Sergachev and Seider and Uyghur, all of these guys are not necessarily guaranteed on the power play one. So this is kind of a riskier spot in the draft. Hamilton would be a little bit safer. I would think Carlson would be safer to get that number one power play spot. Maybe Brock Faber as well. And then as you turn down to Vegas, Shea Theodore, Pietrangelo, and Hanifin all saw power play time there. Now, Hanifin didn't take the power play spot and run with it in Calgary, which is why we saw Rasmus Andersson there, which is why we saw Uyghur. We saw a little bit of Mira Manoff after the trade. But with that said, Shea Theodore has been the power play quarterback in years past. It is a contract year for Theodore. Pietrangelo has seen some time there. Everybody in Vegas blocks shots, so that should give you a good peripheral floor. If you're going to get Noah Hanifin, you're going to get him at value at 114. But there is a little bit of risk there because if he's not the power play guy, he is a pretty good defenseman. He does have a little bit of a peripheral floor, but it's not going to be as good as a guy like Pietrangelo who blocks a ton of shots. Theodore just doesn't hit, and he didn't score a lot of goals last year. He had 5 goals on the year. He should be due for a bounce back. He was in my bounce back video. But with that said, any of these 3 guys could end up being the power play 1 quarterback. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. And then with Washington, it's always been John Carlson. That's why I'm kind of favoring him for this spot. And at ADP 118, he's a very good shot blocker, good peripherals there, usually good shot volume, and he can score goals too. He's between 10 and 15 goals almost all of the last 5 years. So at ADP 118, you're getting a really complete defenseman who should be the power play 1 quarterback. But Sandin did get some time last year, and they also bring in Jacob Chychrun. Chychrun is a really good shot volume guy. He also blocks shots, and he could challenge for some power play ice time. Now, the thing is, they're going to have Ovi in his office. They're going to have a revamped look on the front end of that power play. Dubois will probably factor in. I don't think they're going to go 2D, so it will be 1 defenseman. They do sometimes use 2 units, but Ovechkin stays out there regardless, so there's fewer spots on the second unit. So this will be interesting to see in training camp and preseason how they utilize these guys, but there should be some value on both Chychrun and Carlson. You can see Chychrun at 153, Carlson at 118. These are, again, guys that are relatively complete, 60 and a 59, and they are potential power play quarterbacks at that as well. So these are also sorry about that. These are really good D3 options, and you could potentially find some value here, but if you're in that categories league and if you want those hits and blocks D, you're probably going to have to pay a premium, as we saw earlier in this video. So who are those hits and blocks D, and where do you need to find them? These are the hits and blocks leaders. ADP 1000 means they were not ranked when I first ran these ADPs. Some of these guys have moved up in the last couple days and weeks that we've gone on into these mock drafts that are populated with real people and people actually drafting. Jeremy Lauzon, by far and away, the number 1 leader here. 4.89 hits per game, 1.45 blocks per game. Incredible numbers. If you're in a hits and blocks league, you should probably reach on him in that late, 8th, 9th round range. That seems to be where a lot of these guys start to get drafted. If you're in a league like this, I know in years past, Gudis has been picked in that range. Trouba has been picked in that range. This is sort of anecdotal just based on my leagues and the times that I've spent in leagues like this. But here's Gudis. He's still doing it. He just got named captain. Still very productive in the hits and blocks department. 3.5 hits, 2.3 blocks per game. You've got Simone Benoit, who's kind of established himself as this for Toronto. They have kind of needed this on their back end, a little bit more physicality. 3.8 hits per game is nice, 1.5 blocks. So all three of these guys are technically not ranked in this ADP, but they should be late round ADP value right now. And I would jump up and grab one of these guys if you're in a bangers league and you want that D3 to cover those categories for you, because these are the elite level guys. Same thing with Jacob Trouba. He just doesn't have a lot of offense. None of these guys have a ton of offense to their game. But Trouba, very consistent and a nice even split, 2.7 hits, 2.6 blocks per game. Here you got Mo Sider, and this is why he's so valuable. He does put up some points, 45, 50 points in that range is where he should be, even without the power play time. If he gets power play time, that's a floor for him. But with that said, 2.5 hits and 2.5 blocks per game is really nice to have from a D that you're going to draft in that range. So even if he isn't the power play one quarterback, you're getting some value for him there. Along that same line of thought, here's Mackenzie Weegar, 2.3 hits, 2.4 blocks. That's why he's so valuable. So both of these guys are kind of paired in the sense that if they get that power play one spot, they're going to be incredible value for you here. If they don't, they're still good value in a bangers league because they do hit and block shots as well. Same type of thing down here. Rasmus Dahlin, a little bit lower on this chart. However, he's one of the elite defensemen because of this. He does have really good offensive numbers. Last year was a little bit of a down year because of their power play numbers. However, at 2.4 hits, 1.9 blocks, and the shot volume that he put up, almost 3 shots per game, he is a guy who can put up around 15 goals in a season, and he should be around a point per game. Wasn't close to that last year because of that power play number. But this is a power play quarterback that you get earlier in the draft at ADP 33, but he should still be really good value because of that peripheral floor. Same type of thing with Charlie McAvoy. He gets a little bit lower offensive numbers than a guy like Dahlin, but still 2.1 hits, 2.1 blocks per game. That's why he's got incredible value. This is a filtered list with anybody above 4 hits and blocks combined, but a little bit lower was Noah Dobson. And he's another one of those guys that you're going to have to pay a premium on, but he is going to give you that peripheral floor. And then in terms of the rest of these guys, a lot of these guys are mainly hitters or blockers. You got Tenorti, who doesn't get a lot of offensive production. Burrows, I believe, I could be wrong, but didn't he go to LA? That could be incorrect. Maybe I'm factoring in that incorrectly. But Hakanpää, he's another hitter. You've got Murphy, you've got McCabe. Some other guys coming out of nowhere. Ty Emberson, I didn't really expect to be on this list, but 3.1 hits per game, and he goes to a better offensive team, so that could be a little bit of value. I'm not sure how much ice time he's going to get there. Luke Shen is always a really good hits and blocks guy. That's a theme with these Nashville guys, apparently. Luke Shen, Jeremy Lauzon, they've been really good hits and blocks guys, and then even Roman Josi does pick up a little bit of peripheral coverage as well. So a lot of options here and not a lot of guys that are currently being drafted. Some guys are. Neil Pionk, a little bit drafted down here. You got Darnell Nurse, who is kind of that Jacob Trouba model where he's not going to get a lot of offensive production, but nice even split between hits and blocks. So that's why he's getting drafted. Caden Gooley, really nice blocks numbers, 2.5 per game, 1.6 hits per game. And then, the rest of these guys should be available for you on the waiver wire. But if you're in that categories league, you probably want to reach and grab them. So let's take a look now at my categories league and where the champions and the top 3 finishers drafted their D and see what they did. So if you've watched this channel before, this is a league that you're familiar with, the THHL. This is my main money league. This league's been going on for almost 15 plus years. It might be even longer than that at this point. AC Delaware River beat me on a tiebreaker in the championship game, which I was pissed about, and I will be coming back for revenge this season. But he drafted right after me in the draft. I was 6, he was 7. So coming back at the other end of the snake, he drafted before me and grabbed Roman Josi, who he thought I wanted, and I did. But I just went back and grabbed Rasmus Dahlin, and that worked out well for both of us. John Carlson was a little bit of a reach here, but he still held up a little bit of value because of the peripherals that he put up, and he really came on towards the end of the season and helped me towards my fantasy playoffs, which was a really nice bonus because I didn't have a lot left in terms of defensemen. I had Letang for peripherals, and I had Chychrun for shot volume. But that was pretty much it. I found some guys off the waiver wire to help me out here and there. And that's going to be a theme with this year's strategy, is not picking that D4 and finding value on the waiver wire. But in terms of Delaware River, he picks up Heiskanen in this range. That's kind of where he's going again this year. So that's a really nice tandem to have. Josi Heiskanen as your 1-2. Picks up Nurse for hits and blocks here in the 9th round. So there's that theme. 3 defensemen taken within the first 9 picks, and he won the league. So that's kind of showing that this is a strategy that you can win with, albeit without a lot of data, and we'll get to that in just a second. Brandon Montour was a nice value pickup here at 11, but he was injured to start the year, and he didn't have the year that he had previous, but he still was relatively valuable there. Zach Werenski's a nice shot volume goal-scoring defenseman that he found in the 13th round, and Mike Matheson, he's always that value play. I was maybe a little bit preoccupied picking up Vincent Trocheck at 174, but Matheson would have been nice on my team as well, and I've gone to him in the past, and he's worked out very nicely for me. You can see Sterling Slapshots here going for Fox in the 3rd round, taking a big swing on upside with Luke Hughes here in the 7th round, and that paid off for him. If that didn't pay off, if that didn't work out, if Hughes was not the power play 1 quarterback that he turned out to be, he would not have been in the top 3, because the rest of his D leaves a little bit to be desired. Hampus Lindholm and Arbor Jackeye. Jackye's a hits guy. Lindholm didn't have a great offensive season the way that he did 2 years ago. But with that said, a lot of things to take into account here in terms of strategy. So the winner of this league followed the strategy that we're advocating this year, picked up 3 defensemen in the first 9 rounds. I came in second. I only had 2 defensemen in the first 9 rounds. And then this was 2 defensemen in the first 9 rounds as well for Sterling Slapshot. So that's interesting to note. And as we turn to the Data Draft League, this was a league that I ran for our Patreon members. We're trying to expand this year and get a couple of leagues going. We had 2 leagues last year, this league and the unofficial league. So if you want to join one of these leagues, follow the link in the description below. Join the Patreon League membership, and then you can access our Discord where we organize all this. But with that said, the league champion above average, Dahlin in the 2nd round, Werenski in the 6th, Drew Doughty in the 9th. So following the strategy to a T, 3 defensemen before the 9th round, taking a peripherals defenseman in Ekholm at 13, and kind of a shot in the dark here with the last pick, or the second to last pick in the draft, at Owen Power. And then 2nd place, Seattle Krakelak. Mo Sider at 26 is a reach for me. That's a little bit too early, but it seemed to work out. Darnell Nurse in the 8th. So again, that theme of 2nd place players only picking 2D in the first 9 rounds. Theodore and Larson at 11 and 12, and then Faravari for hits in the 17th. Had they had a little bit more offensive punch, maybe with this first pick or with an additional pick in the top 9, that could have helped them in the championship. Ultimately, it did not pay off. I did pick 3D in the top 9, and I got a really good value pick in Evan Bouchard, but Chychrun did not necessarily take over that power play, as we saw Sanderson and Shabbat were competing with that, and Chychrun did get some time there, but didn't necessarily have an incredible offensive season, and then Pietrangelo didn't necessarily get that power play spot either, and I probably would have been better off grabbing Theodore later in the draft. But with that said, Hronek did do some really good work for me early in the year with Quinn Hughes. That was a really nice pickup late in the draft. So 2 of these 3 ended up using the strategy that we're advocating for. But what is that strategy this year? Let's summarize everything that we just talked about today. So the strategy goes like this. You still want to draft those 2 elite power play quarterback defensemen. You preferably want to get them between the 3rd and the 9th round. If you have to draft a D in the 1st or 2nd round, it usually doesn't come back to bite you, because you're getting a Makar, you're getting Dahlin or Josi or one of those guys, but you want to make sure they have a high offensive ceiling, 1 point per game plus ceiling offensively, and some peripheral coverage as well. You usually, if you're not in a 12-team league, it's the 108 mark or around the 110 mark. That's kind of where you want to have your defense drafted by that point. And you want to prefer those undisputed quarterback options, the guys that were on that previous slide in the top section over here, that you wanted 1D from up there and 1D from down here. Those are the guys that are going to be the least risky, and you do not want to have risk in the first 6 rounds of your draft, because in the first 6 rounds, about 50% of your players drafted are going to be potentially disappointing. So you want to minimize that risk as best as you can. With your D3, it depends on league format and point weighting. If you're in a league that weighs power play production, and you're in a points league, specifically that weighs power play assists or goals or whatever, you're going to want a timeshare power play quarterback that we saw on one of those previous slides, and preferably a guy with good peripherals just in case they don't end up getting a lot of power play time. If you're in a categories league and you're in a hits and blocks league like we just saw, you're going to want to reach and grab an elite hits and blocks D at the tail end of that ADP 108 range. So 8th, 9th round, that's where you're going to want to reach and grab a guy like Shen, like Truba usually is one of those guys. We saw a number of them on the previous slide, so we won't necessarily touch on that. But I do advocate reaching for them because if your league has them, everybody else in your league, it just takes one guy to draft them, and then there's a run on those guys. And you do not necessarily need to draft them that high, but I just want to point it out that in my league, it's been consistent. Guys like Gudis and Truba and whatnot going in that 9th, 10th round range. So just want to point that out. D4 this year is optional. So you can get a high risk quarterback type in the draft, maybe a Lane Hudson really deep, maybe Luke Hughes falls to you, maybe you can find Mintyukov or somebody like that really deep in the draft, and that could be a swing for the fences that pays off for you. But if that doesn't work out, you can use this spot to stream defensemen. So if there's an injury on one of the top power play units, like a couple years ago, the Rangers lost Adam Fox, Gustafsson filled in. He did really well. Previously, Gustafsson had filled in Washington. When John Carlson went down, he did really well there. So injuries on power play units could provide some value finding the replacement guy on the waiver wire. Or you could look for the D who kind of come out of nowhere to take that power play spot. And there have been a couple of examples over the past couple of years. And to that effect, there's usually an injury that's involved in that process as well. So we did talk about the Sharks. They may have a guy coming out of nowhere to quarterback that power play. And there's a number of other teams that are relatively low in the standings that you probably can find on the waiver wire. Now, before we go, I do want to mention after your draft, please go down to the description here and fill out my data draft data collection Google form. What this is going to do, you input your league settings, you input your selections that you've made and where you made them, and then you come back at the end of the year and tell me where you finished. And I'll use all of that data to help all of us craft better draft strategies based on each individual league format, whether it's salary cap, whether it's Dynasty League with keepers, whether it's a head-to-head redraft with categories or points. We can collect all of that data and have a much bigger sample size to work with than just the 1 or 2 leagues that I've featured in this video. So if you want to help out and help everybody on this channel that watches and whatnot create a better strategy, please go to the link in the description and fill out this data draft collection Google form. It would mean a lot to me to help me get some better data, and it would definitely provide better value for you guys with the content next season. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all for watching again, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.